Hello, my name is Miroslav Bahinsky. Thank you for your interest in our research on the dynamics of mid-air aimed movements. It is performed jointly with Jörg Müller at the University of Bayreuth. Our paper contributes an exploratory analysis of the dynamics of mid-air movements and provides a simple yet accurate model of these dynamics, the third-order lag. The mid-air aimed movements are crucial for the post-desktop user interfaces, and in particular for virtual and augmented reality user interfaces. The aimed movements are a common research topic for the HCI field, with multiple papers looking at the movements of a mouse, or a few recent papers looking at the ergonomics and performance of mid-air movements. However, typically movements in HCI are considered at the aggregated level, with some scalar indices for the complete movement between two targets. For example, Fitts law provides a relationship between the movement duration, target size, and amplitude. In our research, we go beyond the typical for HCI consideration of aimed movements at the aggregated level. For post-desktop interfaces, in particular VR and AR, the complete understanding of the movement dynamics, namely trajectories, velocities, and accelerations, are of huge importance. This dynamics describes the behavior of the end effector between the target on the moment-to-moment basis, instead of a single scalar. Let's start by discussing the related work in this area. In general, the analysis of movements has been a topic of motor control and biomechanics research for a few decades. Here I provide a short overview of the research directions and a few relevant findings. One research direction considered the movement performance as an aggregated measure for the complete movement, for example by relating the total movement time to the properties of the target, as in Fitts and Mayer's law. Multiple works dealt with the analysis of aimed movement data and identified their specific features and invariants. For example, the bell-shaped velocity profile, the close-to-straight trajectory, and effects of load on the movement accuracy and velocity. Based on these features and relationships between them, multiple models and motor control hypotheses were proposed. For example, two-thirds power law, minimum jerk hypothesis and model, multiple movement optimality hypothesis, and the corresponding models, such as minimization of the torque change, of metabolic cost, or of motor noise. A few further movement generation models were proposed, such as the sigma-log normal generation of velocity profile by the kinematic theory, or vector integration to endpoint model, which is a second-order model that takes nonlinear function as extra input for the trajectory generation. Most of these models are quite complex and require the fitting of multiple parameters for a meaningful movement prediction. There are a few works that deal with the dynamics of aimed movements within the field of HCI. For example, Bootsma explored dynamics of aimed movements with high and low indices of difficulty and found that Hooke plots, namely the relationship between the acceleration and position, are N-shaped for the movements with high IDs, and they are a tilted line for movements with low indices of difficulty, which become oscillatory. Gaillard found that repetitive aimed movements exhibit different dynamics than the concatenation of the discrete aimed movements. Aronowski developed a second-order model for aimed movements, which switches between open-loop phases for the initial part of the movement and switches to the closed-loop control closer to the target. Müller proposed a framework for understanding human-computer interaction as a dynamic system. They analyzed mouse pointing data and compared the performance of 4 existing control theoretical models. In another work, he analyzed the dynamics of mouse movements with different transfer functions used to accelerate pointing, and developed a generic model to represent these dynamics. To our knowledge, no research in HCI considers the dynamics of mid-air movements, so this work is the first one. For the analysis, we have used 2 previously published datasets of mid-air aimed movements. Both explorative analysis and modeling are based on the data from these datasets. Both datasets cover repetitive aimed movements executed as fast and accurate as possible, between pairs of targets of 3 different sizes, uniformly distributed within the whole space reachable by the arm. These movements were recorded using full-body motion capture with a phase-space motion capture system at 480 Hz, with an extra marker attached to the end effector. We use the data from this marker in our work. Both datasets contain a total of more than 100,000 aimed movements. In one dataset, movements cover all possible permutations of the 25 targets in 900 trials. in this way covering the complete movement space, and are collected from a balanced athlete to provide the upper boundary of skilled performance. The end effector trajectories of two representative movements selected in each trial are visualized on the right part of this slide. In the second dataset, the movements cover the combinations of a stratified sample of 5 targets, selected from the initial 25 targets for each of 16 participants. Each participant has executed 30 trials, in total of 480 trials in the complete dataset. We use only raw motion capture data from the original datasets to minimize the artifacts introduced by the preprocessing to the dynamics analysis. We clean the data using the standard for motion capture procedure, but keep track of modified or interpolated data. We apply the Savitsky-Golay filter to compute the velocity, acceleration, and jerk as the derivatives of the position. We further segment the data into the individual aimed movements and target switches. For simplicity of the analysis, we project each movement on the new dimensions, with the first axis corresponding to the vector between the targets. The second axis corresponds to the perpendicular from the most distant trajectory point to the first axis, and the third axis is perpendicular to the first two, but it is not visualized on this slide. To some extent, these three axes would correspond to principal components of the movement trajectories. We then project each movement trajectory, as well as velocity, acceleration, and jerk, onto the new axis, as demonstrated here. This slide demonstrates the trajectory profiles projected into the new coordinate system for a movement with large deviations from the straight line. As can be observed, the first dimension exhibits the largest component. The second is only up to 20% in amplitude compared to the first one, and the third is only up to 5% of the amplitude. When considering the complete dataset, the deviations from the straight line are mostly very small, with an average deviation of around 5% of the amplitude. So for simplicity of analysis and modeling in the rest of the paper, we consider the first largest dimension. For all movements of both datasets, we generate the plots of dynamics. Namely, we plot the trajectory, velocity, and acceleration profiles, as well as the phase portraits, Hooke plots, and even jerk with respect to position plots. By visually inspecting all these plots, we identify a few types of dynamics patterns, which are very different from the dynamics of the mouse movements. For example, this slide demonstrates the plots for the oscillatory movements. Such movements are controlled in an open-loop way and resemble the behavior of the spring mass damper system. Such movements appear in the datasets for the trials with the large targets, which require lower accuracy. The second type of movements we observed were the movements with oscillations at one of the targets and no oscillations at the other target. This can be observed in the egg-shaped phase portraits. Such movements have not been observed for the mouse. They might occur due to much larger movement amplitudes, as well as the direction of movement has a high impact on vertical movement. The most common dynamics pattern of aimed movements belongs to the third category, the non-oscillatory movements. In this pattern, the phase portrait is I-shaped, and the Hooke plot is N-shaped, which denotes participant controllably stopping inside a target before starting acceleration towards the next target. And the last observed pattern type is the type in which movements have inflections in the phase portrait and more complex than N-shaped Hooke plot. Our hypothesis is that such movements can occur when the arm reaches the boundaries of the movement space, and as a result, require more than only agonist and antagonist muscle groups for movement execution. To sum up, the mid-air movement dynamics are more diverse than mouse dynamics and include some patterns never reported before. The second contribution is the modeling of dynamics of the mid-air aimed movements. We use previously published second-order lag model as a baseline. It has been used for modeling the mouse movements. The second-order lag corresponds to the spring mass damper system and has three parameters to fit: K1, K2, and K3. In this model, the acceleration is computed as a difference between target error, velocity, and position, weighted with the coefficients. The velocity and position are computed from the acceleration by integration with two integrators. The drawback of the second-order lag is that it can generate discontinuities in the acceleration at the target switch, which would require instant forces. From the physiological perspective, the muscles cannot generate arbitrary forces instantaneously. Rather, the forces are generated according to muscle activation dynamics. In simple terms, these dynamics can be added as another integrator to the second-order leg in front of the acceleration. This integrator takes weighted muscle excitation or jerk as input and produces acceleration. The second update is adding the weighted acceleration to the difference term together with the velocity and position. This requires another weighting coefficient, K4, and results in the third-order leg model. Both models take as inputs the initial values of position, velocity, and for the third-order leg also acceleration. The other input is the target position. The models then simulate the complete time series of the position, velocity, acceleration, and the third-order leg also jerk for the complete movement to the target. When considering reciprocal pointing movements, we need additionally to provide the target switch times. This would allow simulating dynamics for not just a single aimed movement, but for the complete movement sequence. The second-order leg model has 3 parameters, and the third-order leg has 4 parameters. They represent the properties of the neuromuscular system executing the movement. Thus, we need to fit these parameters for each movement type. Namely, we fit the models for each of the 1,380 trials in the datasets. We split each trial into the trained data and test data by selecting 2 sample sequences of 20 movements each. We fit the models by optimization of the sum-squared error between the position, velocity, and acceleration of simulated data and of the trained data. In the end, we evaluated the fitted models by computing the root mean square error and mean absolute error between the simulated and test data. We fitted the models to the data and found that the third-order leg outperformed the second-order leg in around 2/3 of cases, namely in the typical aimed movement cases, when the participant stops at the target. It can even generate such qualitative features of the velocity profile as inflections and drops in the acceleration at the target. Unlike the second-order leg, it also does not have any discontinuities. In the rest, 1/3 of movements, the second-order leg outperforms, mostly in very fast movements. The third-order leg cannot match the faster dynamics of the spring mass damper system and drifts in frequency from the experimental data. To quantify the performance of the 2 models, we have compared the root mean squared error and mean absolute error for each trial. The differences in both error measures are significant for all position, velocity, and acceleration for the dataset of 16 participants, and acceleration for the athlete dataset. In all cases, the third-order leg outperformed the second-order leg by 25 up to 40%. Here I want to discuss the limitations of our research and future work. In the exploratory analysis, we found that the dynamics of mid-air movements are very different from the mouse movements. We have identified a few qualitative dynamics patterns in the data. However, the data comes from 2 experiments with equivalent designs and procedures, so for better generalization, we would need to analyze the dynamics of mid-air movements from other datasets. The third-order leg outperforms the second-order leg for mid-air movements, and should theoretically outperform also for other movement types, for example for mouse data. The large dataset comes from a single user, which reduces the generalizability, but when compared to the other dataset, the dynamics of the athlete looks representative for the general population. But this is another motivation to try the model in the future on other datasets. One drawback of dynamics models is the tuning of parameters for each trial. It should be possible in the future to create a meta-model which would provide the third-order leg parameters for given task properties. To conclude, our research contributes an explorative analysis of mid-air aimed movements dynamics and proposes a new, more accurate model. We have identified 4 movement types according to their dynamics: oscillatory, one-sided oscillatory, non-oscillatory, and complex movements with inflections. We have proposed the third-order leg model as more physiologically plausible. We have fitted and evaluated it with respect to the second-order leg as a baseline for the 2 mid-air movement datasets. We found that the third-order leg outperforms the baseline for the majority of movements in accuracy in terms of root mean square error and mean absolute error.